Howdy y'all, my name is Andy King and welcome to another episode of King's Comics. Today I wanted to continue in part of this series that I've been trying to commit to, which is about going over my comic book collection as of 2018. Now this is only including my trade copies, like my paperbacks, my hardcovers, my omnibuy, things like that. So if you have any other questions, maybe about which floppies or single issues I have, then please feel free to drop a line down below in the comments. But that being said, the kind of format for this is me to just go through this pile of comics I have over here to my left and give like kind of a rundown on what it's about, when and why I got it, maybe why I'm keeping it, if it has an emotional significance to me. Small details like that. But once again, I have about 500 comics, so I'm trying to keep it going as steadily as possible. So without much further ado, let's continue. And sorry for the random nature of this. I'm in the process of reorganizing this, so there's not too strong of a structure. They're just, I'm pulling books from behind my shelf as well as another bookshelf in my apartment. So apologies if this seems a little bit chaotic. That being said, let's begin. So, let's see, a few of these that I have are going to be Animal Man comics. For those who don't know who Animal Man is, his secret identity is Buddy Baker. He's this, this is an interesting one, because he's this family man. He's a vegetarian who can, he can connect to this, this kind of morphogenic network, right? And he can take the powers of animals. It's kind of like a Vixen or Beast Boy, except he doesn't transform into the animals. He just takes their powers, so he can fly. And then actually in a couple runs, such as you have Jeff Lemire's run that came out a couple years back during the New 52 reboot, as well as Grant Morrison's run that came out in the 90s when DC was trying to reinvent this character. The character, the hero, gets a little bit more powerful. So you see him start to be able to actually turn into animals. You see him like be able to tap into certain animals, like more, I guess, hidden or niche abilities. So if there's a worm nearby, right, he can tap into a worm's ability in order to regrow limbs and things like that. It gets very crazy, very creepy. He can even, in the New 52 run, he can even tap into alien creatures, right? If they're in the morphogenic network, he can tap into these animals that are off-worlds. I tried my best to collect each of those runs, so I've got Volume 1 from the Lemire run. I think I have a couple other issues lying around in other places. And then I've got Volume 1 from the Morrison run. Now, the Morrison run is a lot kind of trippier because we start to get into this meta-analysis. Grant Morrison is very famous for that. He even wrote and worked on Doom Patrol, who Gerard Way of My Chemical Romance is writing for and working on right now. So in Grant Morrison's run, we actually see him, that's Buddy Baker, Animal Man, come into contact with the author, Grant Morrison, and it gets very, well, that's already pretty meta, but it kind of becomes this incredible meta-narrative about how creators versus the creation works in comics, and it's really, really crazy. This is part of DC's Vertigo line, which is where we see comics such as Preacher, the Hellblazer, that's John Constantine, as well as Sandman published. So it's part of this alt wave of comics that DC targeted towards kind of more mature readers. So from Grant Morrison's run, I've got volumes 1, 2, and 3, or rather I guess that's 1, 2, and 3, which completes his run before it gets handed off to another author. That being said, that's another incredible run that I recommend. And then we get into Jeff Lemire's run. Now for Jeff Lemire's run, there's 5 volumes in total, but I've only got 3 right now just because I'm trying to save money. And then I start spending that money on other comics. Either way, I get sidetracked very easily. So I've got volumes 1, 3, and 4, which means I just need to collect 2 and 5 in order to complete my collection of that run. So those are the first 6 comics I'm going over for today. Next we get into an interesting comic, also part of the Vertigo line, called 100 Bullets. This is by Brian Azzarello, who maybe some people are aware of this. He's writing a comic for DC Black Label right now, which is known as Batman Damned. This is the one that this is the one that got a lot of controversy earlier this year because it featured Bruce Wayne's genitals in one of the shots. It was a very, very, very controversial hot button issue for a little bit, which is why the first issue isn't getting reprinted. However, this is a different comic by the same author, Brian Azzarello. So in this comic, we come to a world where there's this kind of secret organization, and if they feel that you've been offended, they come to contact you, or they feel that it kind of progresses their own aims, they will contact you and they'll give you a suitcase with a gun and 100 bullets in it. Now, these are 100 unmarked bullets. They have no way to trace them back to you. If you shoot them, cops will be on your side. No one will report them. The gun is untraceable. So, you have 100 bullets to take revenge on whoever you want, to do whatever you need to do to right the wrong that you feel has been enacted against you. It's a very dark, like, crime narrative. Once again, I try to only collect books that I would recommend or that I have some kind of weigh in on. I'm still trying to finish and resolve this series. I think there might be 13 volumes, and I'm about to 5 or 10 in. It gets kind of blurry, to be honest, just because I hop back and forth between series, but this is another great one, especially if you like crime dramas. Brian Azzarello is very good at that. Him and the artist, Eduardo Risso, have worked on a lot of crime narratives together, and yeah, that's 100 bullets for you. Coming up next, we've got Batman Year One. Now, this is one of the quintessential Batman works. It's by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, with David Mazzucchelli being another famous Spanish artist who has teamed up with Frank Miller for, to my knowledge, Batman Year One, as well as Daredevil Born Again, another quintessential kind of comic work, but that one about Daredevil. So in Batman Year One, we see this kind of a rewrite of the Batman mythos, like how he came to be, his first year back in Gotham, and how he became the Batman, like the steps he took, as well as some of his first interactions with heroes and villains, as well as with Commissioner Gordon, how that relationship was formed, and how he figured out who he was going to be, the kind of a path he set, the trajectory he set to become the Batman we all know, love, fear, whatever. So this is a great book. It actually led into the second one I have on my list, which was not by Frank Miller, but is this is an interesting one. Batman Year 2. So this one is about Batman once again, but in his year 2, and rather than just getting like kind of in line with concreting his origin story, we actually see Batman come to terms, as well as set one of his other most important mantras in place, which is that Batman does not use guns. However, in Batman Year 2, we see him once again set this as more concrete and finalize it, as he has to use a gun to hunt down a villain known as the Grim Reaper. However, once again, this kind of changes the tone of Batman as a character. It kind of causes some more issues with the cops, the Gotham Police Department, as well as sets this kind of less fatal, this not, well, I won't say non-lethal, but non-fatal Batman, this tone for the character. Then we get into The Dark Knight Returns. This one is also by Frank Miller. However, this is written and drawn by Frank Miller. This is on the opposite end of the Year 1 and Year 2 spectrum, where we see Batman as an older superhero crime fighter who is just done with being Batman. He's at some events you find out about have led to him kind of hanging up the cowl, not wanting to be Batman anymore. But however, Gotham comes to such a state of just comes to a state of such downtroddenness, just crime running rampant, that he finally decides to pick up the cowl and become Batman again. This is, once again, another quintessential work. We've actually seen it animated in the DC animated universe, as well as used as kind of the foundation for the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight Rises movie. And Batman Year 1 was also used as a basis for the Christopher Nolan movie Batman Begins. Both of these have been used a lot as bases for different Batman stories, but are two of the main quintessential. If you ask someone about like what Batman stories you should read, those two are usually top of a list somewhere. A lot of Batman coming up. Now we get into Batman White Knight. This is a more modern one. You maybe heard me mention DC Black Label first, which I've already mentioned kind of imprints and sub-labels, how those work. But DC Black Label is this recent kind of imprint of DC where they're creating these more mature narratives and tones for different heroes. Like they're coming out with a Superman Year 1, also by Frank Miller. But in in Batman White Knight, we ask the question of what would happen if the Joker went sane? And we actually see that as Batman is kind of like becoming more psychologically unhinged. You see that Alfred's dying, and it's causing him to just stop caring about adhering to some of his more just concrete rules, and he attacks the Joker and force feeds him a bunch of psychiatric medication. The Joker becomes sane, and as Jack Napier starts launching and waging this kind of legal battle against Batman, kind of turning Gotham against him. It's a really interesting tale. It gives us a side of the Joker we've never seen before, because it's this still a battle between good and evil, but from different sides of the different sides of the traditional Batman versus Joker narrative. It's a great one. It's by Sean Gordon Murphy, who's typically on the artist side of the table, but for this one is the artist and author. So he does a great job. I can't recommend this book enough. It's one of my favorite Batman stories, not just to come out in years, but just overall, one of my favorite Batman stories of all time. And then we come to a lesser known series. There's only 2 volumes of this so far, but this is called Bedlam. It's actually funny that this one's coming right after Batman White Knight, because in Bedlam volumes 1 and 2, we ask the kind of question of, wow, actually these ones are very, very similar. It just occurred to me that in this one, we kind of take this concept called an XP, or an exposition, which is when you take a long-established character archetype and you examine it in the lens of like an original character or something you make. So that's why in Bedlam we see the character Matter Red, I believe he's called. So Matter Red is this XP for the Joker. However, we also see him become sane, and we get to see what happens when this character who's committed all these atrocities against mankind becomes sane and wants to actually help arrest the same types of criminals, the same types of criminally insane personnel that he used to be, with him kind of disassociating from his past in order to help his fellow man. Once again, this is very similar in tone, I didn't even think about it till now, to Batman White Knight, and maybe why I like both works so much. And it's actually by Nick Spencer, who is, for those following Marvel right now, the Marvel comics, Nick Spencer is currently writing The Amazing Spider-Man, and he's done a lot of interesting work, even in regarding the fact that he's had Spider-Man, Peter Parker, reveal his identity to James Jonah Jameson in the comic. A lot of interesting stuff going on. There's 2 volumes of that. People have been wanting a third, but this one's actually published by Image, who was created by Todd McFarlane and Robert Kirkman, who have created Spawn and The Walking Dead, respectively. Hang in tight, y'all. We're still going. Now we get into one of my favorite series, Black Science, or I'll say one of my favorite recent series. This one's by maybe top of my list favorite authors, maybe top 5, top 10 for me, Rick Remender. Rick Remender is just this phenomenal author. He's written multiple of my favorite series, not just Black Science, but also this one called, the name escapes me, Fear Agent, which is this kind of twisted narrative about this cowboy Heath Huston who's lost in space, or, just in space as an alien exterminator. Right, I'm going to focus on Black Science. Either way, this one is also published by Image, that kind of indie, this indie publisher we keep coming back to. But Black Science is a story about these anarchistic scientists who develop this transdimensional portal to kind of go across different dimensions to span the multiverse before things start getting very, very wrong very, very quickly. Now, it's got kind of that Lost in Space vibe where you've got this familial unit going across space and time, but it gets very dangerous and dire as you have these different forces across the universe try to steal their technology to kind of come back to our own dimension or to take over the multiverse themselves. There's a lot of family drama involving just infidelity, involving different secrets, absentee father and mother figures. It gets very, very creepy, as well as different members of this kind of core team having their own unsaid aims and false faces for why they're going on this mission and why they signed up for things. It's a very it's coming towards its end, actually, I think, with volume 9, and I've got volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4 right here with me, and somewhere around my room I believe I've got volumes 5 through 8. But once again, I'm lifting and shifting. I'll add those to the countdown, but I'm going to go ahead and say volumes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 have been mentioned today, but I believe volume 9 is coming out soon, which will be the end of the series, and I'll give a review, an overarching review for that series as we approach its conclusion. Now, I've talked about Image. It's a very, I'm not even going to say it's a lesser known publisher. At this point, Image is like right up there with Marvel and DC. It's kind of like the indie version of Marvel and DC. It's got superheroes, but it's got a lot of other things. However, there's another publisher. There's many publishers, but this one I don't know too much about. It's called Z2 Comics, and they created this work called Carver, a Paris story. This is, it's kind of hard to explain this. It's this kind of noir narrative, kind of in the same light and tone as those kind of, James Bond or, not even James Bond, right? But just these kind of pulp style spy tales, right? You got these ultra badass comic book characters, these guys who kind of fly by night, shoot by their own rules, but have these dark histories tied to war or a lot of interactions on a global scale. So this one actually is similar to this older, it takes after this older comic, kind of the same narrative that's taking off of Corto Maltese, which is this adventure-based comic about this character who's just a kind of pirate-esque character going around the world, spanning the globe, and just kind of playing by his own rules. So Carver takes a lot of notes from that, and it's a good comic. I have to reread it, I have to admit. It's been a while, but it's a very interesting thing to consider, like when we get enough out from archetypes that we don't see too many things like Corto Maltese anymore, these pulp stories, that when we see things like Carver, it can seem a little derivative at first, but at the same time is great because it's kind of meant to pay an homage or meant to kind of revitalize the genre or remind people that it's even there. And then we get into a couple of Daredevil comics. We're going to start off with Daredevil Back in Black. So this one is recent with another one of the Marvel reboots, post Secret Wars, by Jonathan Hickman. So this one is by Charles Soule and Ron Garney, and this one's where it's kind of a joke in the Marvel universe up until a point that Daredevil's secret identity is known. That Daredevil is Matt Murdock. People just can't prove it. It's kind of like the ongoing fan theory in the DC universe that everybody knows who Batman is, but nobody messes with him because why would you mess with Batman? This was actually kind of addressed in The Dark Knight by Lucius Fox's character, saying that why would you want to mess with a billionaire who beats up criminals in his free time? So, in this Daredevil book, we actually see a Daredevil who's operating out of Chinatown, the Asian American district in New York, but nobody knows his identity anymore. He starts wearing a black costume, which is pretty freaking awesome, actually, but he's a lot more brutal, he's a lot more jaded. We see his kind of spiritual tendencies, his connections to Catholicism and his belief in God are a little less concrete as they typically are, and we see that nobody remembers his secret identity. So it's a very different version of Daredevil than we're used to. Much darker in tone, as well as we see him take on this is probably my favorite part, we see him take on a sidekick. This is a young Asian American kid, or actually just this Asian immigrant boy, who we come to know as a Blind Spot. So he's incredibly smart to the point that he creates his own costume which can turn entirely invisible, but it legitimately just runs off of like AA like household batteries. But the problem is because he's an immigrant, he's not a legal immigrant. He can't patent it. He can't go talk to Tony Stark about getting the rights for it. It's also this very sad narrative on immigration issues in the U.S. Not that we're trying to get very political, but at the same time that the author Charles Soule, he kind of paints his portrait of the hardships this guy's going through, what his family's going through, Blind Spot, but without getting too political. Just the reality of the fact that these guys are fighting their own battles every day. This series is still ongoing, but it's coming to a close, and it escalates a lot. I got to catch up on it. All I know is that it gets to the point that Matt Murdock is taking laws to the Supreme Court. Wilson Fisk is the mayor of New York City. Once again, escalates, starts going off the rails. Blind Spot is one of my favorite current heroes. Really love him. But recommend that, especially as a good modern Daredevil story. Then we've got Daredevil the Man Without Fear. Now, once again, for people keeping up with DC Comics, you'll notice the name Brian Michael Bendis. This name probably looks familiar for several reasons. One is that he's writing he's writing Superman for DC Comics right now. He recently switched over to DC Comics as an author and is writing Superman, as well as working on a couple other works. Two is that for anybody who's watched Into the Spider-Verse, Brian Michael Bendis, along with the artist Sarah Picella, are the original creators of Miles Morales, the new Spider-Man. So that's a very critical role he's played, as well as being one of the predominant authors, the predominant author over the original Ultimate Universe Peter Parker. Either way, in this one, let's see, Daredevil Wake Up, we have this interesting, just really, really interesting and abstract story. Not even focusing on Daredevil, but focusing on this boy that he's trying to talk to or that multiple people are trying to talk to kind of get his side of the story about how these events unfold with this supervillain that Daredevil's tracking down. The art is by David Mack, who, as you can tell just from the cover and from the back, is a very, just kind of this abstract paint-based work. It's very kind of psychedelic. I mean, David Mack is the man. Like, one of his most famous works is Kabuki. It's this other more abstract tale, but to focus on Daredevil, yeah, this is just a weird story to kind of recount. It's part of the Marvel Knights line, which I think I've alluded to in the past. Is this mature imprint of Marvel that was going on for a while that they're actually kind of trying to revitalize right now. Either way, it's another good one. But in keeping on with Daredevil stories, let's go to boom, Daredevil Born Again. So this is the same creative team that I mentioned worked on Batman Year One, and let's kind of look at it on the this interesting side of the spectrum, which is not the end of a hero, not the start of a hero, but rather the hero kind of in his hero's journey falling to a low point, right? So in Daredevil Born Again by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, we see Karen Page betrays Daredevil's secret identity to the Kingpin, and the Kingpin just wages an all-out from behind-the-scenes war on Matt Murdock's life. He causes his law firm to be shut down. He forecloses on his house. All these things basically just cast Matt Murdock to the darkest, deepest hole in his life. Matt Murdock even tries to fight the Kingpin, gets his butt kicked, and then when he wakes up, he finds himself strapped into a car, doused in alcohol, driving off a pier while he's in the back of this car. If that sounds familiar, that's because that's exactly what happens that's what happens in Daredevil Season 3. RIP. So, a lot of the events in Daredevil Season 3 were based on Daredevil Born Again. And you're going to see that kind of over and over where the Daredevil, well, you probably saw that over and over where the Daredevil seasons have taken a lot of inspiration, but that's typically just how they go. They're going to take inspiration, these TV shows and movies will take inspiration from comics, but are past the point of just adapting things page to screen. So there were a lot of references like that coming out of Daredevil Born Again. I keep saying the word quintessential, but more so it was this kind of pivotal work because it was asking the question of how does a superhero proceed when his arch enemy knows his identity? Like, what is he supposed to do from there? Because it's not someone like Bruce Wayne who can like launch a legal battle to say to wage a case for libel or defamation. So it was an interesting progression of the character in and of itself that has drastically affected the Daredevil story for years to come. Now we get into another Image comic title, which is Dead Body Road by Justin Jordan and Matteo Scalera. I forgot to mention it, but Matteo Scalera is the same artist who's working on Black Science alongside Rick Remender. But Justin Jordan wrote one of my other favorite comics. Y'all gotta forgive me, I got a lot of favorite comics. But he wrote one of my favorite comics, which is called The Legend of Luther Strode, or The Strange Talent of Luther Strode. It's a 3-volume series. I really like it, but let's focus on Dead Body Road. This is one of those kind of good old-fashioned revenge stories. Guy's wife gets killed, and he's going on a rampage to kill the guys who were responsible for it. There's an inside man on the job, that etc., etc. A lot of things go wrong very quickly. It's kind of a straightforward tale. I'm not going to act like it's the most, it's the deepest narrative on the face of the planet. The story is, something that's been done before and beaten with a stick, but at the same time, it's just got gorgeous art. You can tell the author artists just love what they're doing. and that the plot is more of a vehicle to take you through the action, which is kind of how a good action movie should be, in my opinion. Not that it can't have a deep or good story, more so that if you're there for the action movie, then it needs to highlight and make sure that the action is there. The plot, then, yeah, maybe it's subpar, whatever, but the plot should, regardless, act as some level of vehicle to take you through the action and just get you to having more fun. Now, I'm actually excited to kind of talk about this one because of the fact that anyone who's following social media or aware of the Sci-Fi Network, which is somehow still around, have most likely heard the buzzing of this new series that's coming out called Deadly Class. Now, Deadly Class is kind of like Breakfast Club for assassins, and it's also by Rick Remender. Fancy that. But we see this kind of interesting story because it's set in the 80s as backdrop of drugs, music, high school students who want to upset political balances in the world. Yeah, I know, it's very, very weird. It almost reads like something that on a de-escalated scale would be something that you find at a Scholastic book fair. But once again, a lot of sex, a lot of drugs, a lot of violence, a lot of rock and roll. But it's also cool because it's this period piece, right? We get to see organizations like the Black Panthers, like the IRA, like the Soviet Union, the Spetsnaz. We get to see all of these interesting kind of cross sections of global just discord, espionage, just come together with these students who are in this school, like trying to become assassins or trying to become political leaders of their own respective countries, and it ultimately just worked together shockingly well in this backdrop of they're still high school kids. Some are stricter than others with respect to adhering to their studies, but they're just kids trying to do what they can do to get by, survive school, and also try not to get assassinated by their fellow classmates. It's a good read. TV series coming out on Netflix, coming out on Sci-Fi, and I'm stoked for it, coming out in January. And we're coming to a close for today with two last comics. The first is going to be Descender by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen. For those who have heard me talk about him, and I actually brought up his Animal Man series a second ago, Jeff Lemire is another one of those favorite top 10 authors of mine. He's done a lot of works I love, including E6 County, Animal Man, E6 County, Animal Man, Sweet Tooth. But Descender, he also knocks it out of the park by kind of flexing and showing that he's got this ability not just to write about pastoral or family-based works, but to show that he can write sci-fi stories as well, these sci-fi narratives. We've got this story about this little boy, Tim 21, bingo, Tim 21, who wakes up on this lunar colony years after something happens. He's cold, he's alone, he doesn't know what's going on. There are no humans on the station, and this is very critical because, like I said, Tim 21 is an android. He's a cyborg boy. So in kind of a desperation move, just trying to find out what's going on, he sends a broadcast out trying to find anyone who's nearby. However, we actually find out that at this point in time he wakes up and sends out this broadcast, robots are not viewed or treated very well at all in society. It turns out years ago, while he was asleep, these beings called Descenders, these massive robots, just started to appear all over the galaxy. For anyone who's played Mass Effect, it's kind of like the Reapers, right? They started to appear all over and just annihilate organic life. On a social level, this started to cause a kind of backlash in how organic beings, particularly humans or hominid beings, were treating and were treating their robot companions or even their servants or their just robots they worked alongside, to the point of just this violent outrage, this just social discord and disorder as we just see the whole universe turned on its head because of these Descenders. We still don't know what's going on. The series has just kind of come to a close and is starting to progress into its second series called Ascender that takes place years afterwards. But this is a very heartfelt series about a boy who's just very alone, but has this kind of a deeper just questions about like the the state and claim of what makes a human. Like, how do we perceive, just because it's a robot or an artificial intelligence, should we treat it any differently? Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen do a great job of not just having a compelling narrative, but art to go alongside it. these kind of gorgeous painted backdrops that Dust and Wind provides, or just help convey a sense of emotion as well as just gravity to the plight of Tim 21 as well as all the other parties involved, just trying to get through and discover what is behind the mystery of these Descenders as well as how to save the universe from this thing happening again. And then my last comic for today is going to be Destroyer. Now, once again, this is out of the Marvel Max line, another edgy imprint by Marvel that was done with the idea of reaching more mature readers. You might notice the author on the bottom of the page. That's right, it's Robert Kirkman, who, once again, creator of Invincible and The Walking Dead. Robert Kirkman, I gotta admit, everything I've read by him, maybe I just haven't read enough by him, but I've read his Ant-Man run, I've read some of his, I've read all of his Invincible, I've read all of his Invincible, his Ant-Man run, I'm trying to think, Walking Dead. I know I'm missing a couple things, but everything I've read by him I've enjoyed, and Destroyer is no exclusion to that rule. Destroyer, we see this interesting take on I think this is just some old Marvel's pulp hero, but we see this dude who is just literally strong, invincible guy, who's got a weird kind of goblin mask, but it's funny because that's like his only power set. He's just strong and invincible. But we see he's also kind of dying and trying to come to a close on, closing this chapter of his life, what do I do if I die? Who takes care of my family? What happens next? So he's just trying to seal any loose threads he has, which means kicking the crap out of anyone on his hit list of villains who could come and harm his family. It's even funnier because we actually see that he's literally fighting off the forces of death and the balance of the universe just to get through this list of his. And that means, he's he has dreams of these Reapers. Not even dreams, right? But that these Grim Reapers are trying to take him, and he just kicks all their butts just to make sure he stays in this life a little bit longer to protect and save his family. It's a more niche work. It's kind of out there, but I recommend it if you're looking for a non-conventional superhero story about a dude who loves his family, but it's just all about kicking butt and taking names. But y'all, that does it for today. That's another huge slice of comics that I've got going on, and I've got a lot more than that. So we've got a lot of time left. We don't have a lot of time left as 2018 closes out, but I'm going to try to make sure I get through all of these comics before the year's end. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of King's Comics. If you liked what you saw, please hit that like button. If you really liked what you saw, please hit the subscribe button. And if you have any suggestions, comments, or feedback, maybe on anything I missed, maybe on anything I can expound upon, or maybe on some content you'd like to see, I'm still trying to tailor content for this channel. We got huge and big changes, good things happening for 2019, so I'd love to hear back from you. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see y'all next time.